The American Yawp, Chapter 7, A New Nation. Section 11, the election of 1800. Meanwhile, the Alien and Sedition Acts expired in 1800 and 1801. They had been relatively ineffective at suppressing dissent. On the contrary, they were much more important for the loud reactions they had inspired. They had helped many Americans decide what they didn't want from their national government. By 1800, therefore, President Adams had lost the confidence of many Americans. They had let him know it. In 1798, for instance, he had issued a national Thanksgiving proclamation. Instead of enjoying a day of celebration and thankfulness, fear of rioters forced Adams and his family to flee the capital city of Philadelphia. The president's prickly independence had also put him at odds with Alexander Hamilton, the leader of his own party, who offered him little support. After 4 years in office, Adams found himself widely reviled. In the election of 1800, therefore, the Republicans defeated Adams in a bitter and complicated presidential race. During the election, one Federalist newspaper article predicted that a Republican victory would fill America with murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest. A Republican newspaper, on the other hand, flung sexual slurs against President Adams, saying he had neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Both sides predicted disaster and possibly war if the other should win. In the end, the contest came down to a tie between two Republicans, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia and Aaron Burr of New York, who each had 73 electoral votes. Adams had 65. Burr was supposed to be a candidate for vice president, not president, but under the Constitution's original rules, a tie-breaking vote had to take place in the House of Representatives. It was controlled by Federalists, bitter at Jefferson. House members voted dozens of times without breaking the tie. On the 36th ballot, Thomas Jefferson emerged victorious. Republicans believed they had saved the United States from grave danger. An assembly of Republicans in New York City called the election a, quote, bloodless revolution. They thought of their victory as a revolution, in part because the Constitution and 18th century political theory made no provision for political parties. The Republicans thought they were fighting to rescue the country from an aristocratic takeover, not just taking part in a normal constitutional process. In his first inaugural address, however, Thomas Jefferson offered an olive branch to the Federalists. He pledged to follow the will of the American majority, whom he believed were Republicans, but to respect the rights of the Federalist minority. His election set an important precedent. Adams accepted his electoral defeat and left the White House peacefully. The Revolution of 1800, Jefferson wrote years later, did for American principles what the Revolution of 1776 had done for its structure. But this time the revolution was accomplished not by the sword, but by the rational and peaceable instrument of reform, the suffrage of the people. 4 years later, when the 12th Amendment changed the rules for presidential elections to prevent future deadlocks, it was designed to accommodate the way political parties worked. Despite Adams's and Jefferson's attempts to tame party politics, though, the tension between federal power and the liberties of states and individuals would exist long into the 19th century. And while Jefferson's administration attempted to decrease federal influence, Chief Justice John Marshall, an Adams appointee, worked to increase the authority of the Supreme Court. These competing agendas clashed most famously in the 1803 case of Marbury v. Madison, which Marshall used to establish a major precedent. The Marbury case seemed insignificant at first. The night before leaving office in early 1801, Adams had appointed several men to serve as justices of the peace in Washington, D.C. By making these midnight appointments, Adams had sought to put Federalists into vacant positions at the last minute. On taking office, however, Jefferson and his Secretary of State, James Madison, had refused to deliver the federal commissions to the men Adams had appointed. Several of the appointees, including William Marbury, sued the government, and the case was argued before the Supreme Court. Marshall used Marbury's case to make a clever ruling. On the issue of the commissions, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Jefferson administration, but Chief Justice Marshall went further in his decision, ruling that the Supreme Court reserved the right to decide whether an act of Congress violated the Constitution. In other words, the court assumed the power of judicial review. This was a major and lasting blow to the Republican agenda, especially after 1810, when the Supreme Court extended judicial review to state laws. Jefferson was particularly frustrated by the decision, arguing that the power of judicial review would make the judiciary a despotic branch. Section 12, Conclusion. A grand debate over political power engulfed the young United States. The Constitution ensured that there would be a strong federal government capable of taxing, waging war, and making law, but it could never resolve the young nation's many conflicting constituencies. The Whiskey Rebellion proved that the nation could stifle internal dissent, but exposed a new threat to liberty. Hamilton's banking system provided the nation with credit, but also constrained frontier farmers. The Constitution's guarantee of religious liberty conflicted with many popular prerogatives. Dissension only deepened, and as the 1790s progressed, Americans became bitterly divided over political parties and foreign war. During the ratification debates, Alexander Hamilton had written of the wonders of the Constitution. "A nation without a national government," he wrote, "would be an awful spectacle. But," he added, "the establishment of a constitution, in time of profound peace, by the voluntary consent of a whole people, is a prodigy, a miracle that should be witnessed, quote, with trembling anxiety." Anti-Federalists had grave concerns about the Constitution, but even they could celebrate the idea of national unity. By 1795, even the staunchest critics would have grudgingly agreed with Hamilton's convictions about the Constitution. Yet these same individuals could also take the cautions in Washington's 1796 farewell address to heart. "There is an opinion," Washington wrote, "that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty." This, he conceded, was probably true, but in a republic, he said, the danger was not too little partisanship, but too much. "A fire not to be quenched," Washington warned. "It demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest, instead of warming, it should consume." For every parade, Thanksgiving proclamation, or grand procession honoring the unity of the nation, there was also some political controversy reminding American citizens of how fragile their union was. And as party differences and regional quarrels tested the federal government, the new nation increasingly explored the limits of its democracy.